Welcome classic rock fans to another top 10, and I thought in keeping with the season I would do my 10 favourite Christmas albums. For me, the Christmas album falls into two categories. It's either quirky renditions of traditional seasonal music, or it's the Christmas crooners, having been brought up on Bing Crosby and the like. I'm not really a huge fan of the Christmas party type music. But that being said, let's crack on. I will say, if you're new to this channel, please have the time to click like, subscribe, and check that bell so you get notified of any future uploads. And do take a moment to check some of the links I'll put below this video for ways you can support me and the work done here at Classic Album Review. It's always much appreciated. Number 10 is The Last Month of the Year by the Kingston Trio from 1960. This is an interesting album as it celebrates the time of year rather than embracing all that traditional Christmas schmaltz. This is an ambitious album by the Kingston Trio. The Kingston Trio, of course, were Dave Gard, Nick Reynolds and Bob Shane. But on this one, they bring together lots of really intriguing threads and influences from European folk tunes, lullabies, and as one critic has pointed out, even spirituals from the American Deep South. But they embellish them with their own distinctive style, which in itself is rather intriguing. You can see why they were such a big influence on the Beach Boys. Some of the material on this album is quite lurid and dark, as it should be really. Any good seasonal record should have a bit of that. I mean, the opening track, Bye Bye Thou Tiny Little Child, concerns itself with the massacre of the innocents. As I said, it's a record that's well ahead of its time. I mean, don't fear though, there's some festive warblings on it as well. Number 9 is Bob Dylan's A Christmas in the Heart from 2009. I mean, who would have thought his Bobness would turn out a Christmas album? Pitchfork, in their review of this record, describe him as the patron saint of Christmas sneer. However, there are times on this record where he seems to revel in the Christmas schmaltz, ironic perhaps. But I did read that a lot of the proceeds from this record did actually go to charity, which elevates it a little bit in my opinion. Dylan's distinctive drawl seems a little bit out of place on an album celebrating this time of year. Dylan's raspy drawl belies the more traditional renderings of these songs. It has to be said that Christmas is a time usually associated with clear enunciation and pristine angelic voices. Peter Orty, for example, or maybe Shane MacGowan. So it certainly raised a few eyebrows when Dylan announced he was going to actually record an album of festive tunes. This is an album that's worth checking out, even if it's only to frighten the children with. It's certainly an album that would not feature very high on a Bob Dylan ranking, but within the paradigms of Christmas records, it's one worth giving a spin, I think. Number 8 is Tori Amos' Midwinter Graces from 2008. Tori Amos is no stranger to the profound beauty of the season. We only have to cast our minds back to the icy and metaphorical resonances of the song Winter from Little Earthquakes. And of course it was her rendition of A Little Drummer Boy. All those lovely breathy articulations makes it a joy to behold. And she's certainly no stranger to the iconography of Christianity. Let's not forget Crucify was a big hit for her back in 91, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. Not to mention God, which featured on her second album, Under the Pink. And of course this album is where you see the cover with her arms outstretched, almost waiting to ascend. Midwinter Graces is a delicate and lightly frosted collection of seasonal numbers. We get, for example, it's comprised of 5 secular originals and 9 traditional Christmas songs. It surveys a very specific Yuletide topography, if you like. The standout tracks on this record, of course, you get the big band feel of Pink and Glitter, but particularly Winter's Carol, which is mine and my family's favourite on this album. Number 7 is If on a Winter's Night by Sting from 2008. This is an exquisite and atmospheric album, and its performance at Durham Cathedral was absolutely stunning. I mean, it's worth checking out on YouTube. Certainly joyous and triumphant, one would say. But it's certainly one of those wonderful seasonal records that just endeavours to evoke a barren and wintry landscape. One critic has written that Sting on this album favours the formal over the familiar. So instead of the usual seasonal fare, we get winter tales and madrigals, folk songs and hymns. I mean, it does have a distinctly medieval feel at times. Some lovely textures and tones explored within the music and instrumentation of this album, all accompanied, of course, with Sting's familiar vocalisations. You could say there's plenty of wine with this one. There's one for me that's indelibly associated with that performance in Durham Cathedral. I was fortunate enough to study at Durham University, and the student union where you'd always drink it was about £1 a pint there at the time. You could just cross over the bridge and you could just sit in the cathedral, which used to be open till quite late, just sit there, and it was empty and quite haunting. Number 6 is the Elvis Presley Christmas album from 1957. This is an interesting blend of rock and roll and gospel, and it has that sense of hymnal wonder as well. Of course, he's backed by that wonderful vocal group, the Jordanaires, who do a fantastic job on this one. I mean, for example, Santa Claus is Back in Town has a wonderful bluesy swagger to it. And his rendering of A White Christmas, of course, is interesting, has certain jazzy inflections to it. It's not quite as nuanced as the conversational crooning of Bing Crosby, but it's nice nevertheless. I think Rolling Stone perfectly sums up the mood and feel of this record when they said, it's a wonderful mix of light-hearted rock and roll, Santa Bring My Baby Back to Me, reverent versions of traditional favourites, O Little Town of Bethlehem, and nods to his country and gospel roots, Take My Hand, Precious Lord. Let's not forget 1957 was when Elvis was still considered dangerous. There's no doubt plenty of swivel and swagger to these festive reworkings. Number 5 is The Ventures Christmas album from 1965. This car crash of an album really works for me. It just sounds great. We get these interesting renderings of these festive tunes, giving that trademark Ventures twangy guitar and surf vibe. And these dual melodies are all accompanied by the traditional seasonal accoutrements of bells and jangly bits. I love their version of Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, which alludes to I Feel Fine by the Beatles. Frosty the Snowman has a smidgen of Tequila by the Champs. Feels like a sonic and stylistic irreverence as sleigh bells and surf definitely merge on this one. And Silver Bells is an intriguing number. One critic has suggested it has something of the Velvet Underground to it. I think the way it begins, it reminds me of the Byrds, although of course this was recorded in 1965. It's like a festive acid trip, and what could be more fun than that? Number 4 is Frank Sinatra's A Jolly Christmas from Frank Sinatra from 1957. And many critics have argued that it's a kind of a riposte to Elvis Presley's rock and roll and gospel infused version of Christmas cheer. I'm not sure how that could be, as this album actually was released before the Elvis album. Sinatra, of course, is much more traditional in his rendering of these numbers. One can imagine putting one's feet up by an open fire and cracking open a nice bottle of mulled wine while listening to this. And he sings with an effortless grace, of course, on this one, with his hat tipped to the Christmas market. And heartstrings are sufficiently tugged at with songs like I'll Be Home for Christmas and Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas. It's schmaltzy, festive magic at its very best. It's said that Sinatra was very much responsible for the idea of the concept or mood album. Certainly he sets down the blueprint for the paradigms that would become the masculine heartbreak motif that would inform artists such as Ryan Adams much later on, of course. But there's an edginess to the way he sings, to that bourbon-infused drawl, setting him apart from the more homely and domestic croonings of Bing Crosby, for example, or much later on the likes of Andy Williams. But this is a fabulous Christmas record nonetheless. Number 3 is Bing Crosby's Merry Christmas from 1945. Christmas is very much marked in my family by listening to Bert Jansch slur away in the bleak midwinter. But also this one, of course, with those heraldic notes of Crosby's God Rest Ye Merry Gentlemen. The limitations of the technology at the time barely restraining the richness and timbre of that voice. And the opening track on this album is Crosby's rendition of Silent Night. It takes that smooth baritone voice, gives this religious observation a soothing quality, almost like a lullaby. Somebody's described his voice as likening it to having warm caramel poured in your ears. And as I said, his voice rings out like a cathedral bell through the crackle and hiss of these recordings. And of course, no Bing Christmas album would be the same without a rendering of White Christmas. That Irving Berlin pen number, of course, that has become indelibly associated with the season and used devastatingly in the film Holiday Inn from 1942, if I'm not mistaken. Crosby's dreamy and velvety rendering of these songs is just the tonic on a frosty December morning. Of course, Kate Bush was right to include him in that list of the iconography of the Christmas season in her wonderful record, December Will Be Magic Again. I mean, my personal love of Bing Crosby was no doubt instilled by my father, who would drum these voices into me every year. Number 2 is A Christmas Gift for You from Phil Spector from 1965. This album, of course, is one of those Christmas party albums, one of those albums that I said I particularly did not like at the beginning of this video. However, you can't help but just marvel at the arrangements. Of course, it's defined by that traditional trademark wall of sound splurge that we so associate with Phil Spector. You know, it adds an opulence and drama to the proceedings. We get the wonderful Ronnie Spector belting out Frosty the Snowman, The Crystals, Santa Claus is Coming to Town, and these songs have been used in so many Christmas films over the years that buying this album, you're probably familiar with all these songs, all these versions of these songs. Spector said he wanted to produce an album that not only captured the energy and the exuberance of the season, but one that was a timeless pop record as well, and he certainly achieves that. And this record succeeds on so many levels. It positively thrums with life, sublime vocals, it has an energy that is positively infectious. This is the Christmas album, of course, by which all other Christmas albums can be held up to. However, there is a darkness to it, with some of the performers likening the experience to child abuse. There is a darkness that we now associate with Phil Spector overall, but one can't deny he was certainly a visionary. And number one for me is probably quite predictably Jethro Tull, the Christmas album from 2003. Jethro Tull as a band have often explored the textures associated with medieval folk and chamber music. Music that lends itself so well to the Christmas season, of course. This is one of those credible Christmas albums, and there's certainly not many of them. We get some wonderful jazzy intonations, some folky flourishes and Celtic stylings on this one, all underpinned, of course, by Anderson's own wry and ironic observational humour. Last Man at the Party is an interesting number as well, which focuses very much on those seasonal excesses, reminiscent of Tull's A Christmas Song, of course. We get carols and wistful tunes, all punctuated by Anderson's trademark flute, and as well as some reworkings of some classic Tull. There's something for everybody on this album. If you're not predisposed to like Christmas music, I think you'd have to be some kind of prog Grinch not to like this one. Grinch is a word that often applies when Christmas spirit is in short supply, I think it says in the book. But this album is really worth checking out. The re-recordings, of course, you get songs like Weathercock, Fire at Midnight, Ring Out Solstice Bells. Holly Herald, of course, is an interesting amalgamation of Holly and the Ivy and Hark the Herald Angels Sing. It's all quite ingenious stuff, really. This album is an essential listen, making the season indelibly linked with the beardy fellow. Yes, Santa, pass us that bottle, will you? Anyway, that's my collection of 10 favourite Christmas albums. I'd like to say thank you for supporting this channel throughout the year, and hope you all have a wonderful, wonderful Christmas. Just leaves me to say I hope you're all staying safe and distinctly unsober. And more importantly, please do keep listening.